Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, B2B Social Media Strategies That Work, Best Practices by Leading Brands. We are joined today by three presenters. We have with us Philip Agnew from Brandwatch, who's a community manager, Natalie Meehan, also from Brandwatch, who's a content manager, and a guest speaker, Dave Arman, who's the CMO of 3BL Media. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. You can tweet at us today using tweet at Brandwatch using the hashtag BrandwatchTips if you'd like to interact, and we do encourage your participation in this. So please, if you have any questions during the session, you can submit them through Twitter or also through the GoToWebinar panel, and we will do a Q&A at the end. If we don't get to all your questions, we will follow up with you after the session. We are recording today's session, so we will make a recording and the slides available to you within a day or so after the session. That's it. If you have any questions, please submit them, and now we will kick it off. So turning it over to our presenters.
Thanks for the introduction, Drew. So today's webinar will cover two main points: the current state of social in the B2B market and the best practices used by leading B2B brands.
Thanks, Nat. So the groundbreaking effects that social media has had on human interaction is well documented. Like other forms of communication technology, social media is earth shrinking, bringing people, ideas, and opinions closer together. B2C brands have recognized the value of these conversations and thus invested heavily in leveraging this online data to promote their daily activities. Yet a vast number of B2B brands haven't implemented the same investment. Brands in the B2C sector are starting to yield value from this growing communication portal. Customer service complaints are being addressed with, promotional activities are being engaged with, and new leads are being generated. But despite this unique opportunity, 34% of B2B brands have no presence on Facebook or Twitter, and 8% of those that do have no activity on their accounts. That's 42% of leading B2B brands with no activity or no account on social media.
So it's pretty obvious from this research that B2B brands are neglecting social media. Some may claim that B2B brands don't have the volumes of conversation on social to justify putting manpower into these networks, but with over 31 million social mentions per year for the 200 top B2B firms, this excuse just doesn't cut it and it feels outdated. But there are some B2B brands that have embraced social in their business and have given it the resource it deserves, and they're seeing real results from their social strategies that are producing real value for their organizations. But before diving into these strategies, let's take a look at the state of the B2B social landscape. So this pie chart here breaks down where conversation about B2B happens on the web. It shows that conversations about B2B brands are not just limited to social media, and while Twitter and Facebook hold the majority of B2B mentions, a large volume and critical portion of conversation also happens on news sites, forums, and blogs. Just for reference, the data included in this webinar is taken from our B2B report, which was analysing 200 B2B companies, 100 from the UK and 100 from the USA, in 10 different industries.
Cool, so this chart shows a comparison of the share of voice across each B2B industry, and it reveals how divided conversation is. The business software industry, which generates 53% of the overall discussion, is clearly a central focus for B2B conversation online. The aerospace industry follows with 13%, while medical and energy industry each own 8%. To give some context here, those industries with just 1% of the share of voice receive over 300,000 mentions per year, a huge volume of conversation. The business software's rule over the B2B market is fueled by a select few group of companies, pioneering the power of social media to promote their businesses.
So specifically, companies like Intel, IBM, Cisco, and Oracle use their networks to drive brand awareness, fuel lead generation, and champion customer service. To do this, they've put a number of strategies in place. Over the next half hour, we're going to explain the best practices these B2B brands use and also provide some clarity on how your brand can implement them.
Brilliant. So the first best practice we're going to look at is communicating where your audience communicates. It sounds very simple, and it actually really is. So this chart shows a breakdown of earned conversation against owned conversation, and it reveals a discrepancy in the places where brands and their consumers communicate. We see that brands are essentially using just two platforms to communicate. They're using Twitter and they're using Facebook. Yet their audiences are communicating on a variety of platforms like image sites, they're on forums, they're on blogs, and they're on video platforms like YouTube. Many leading B2B companies are missing these key conversations about their brands, and they can't make any insights based on those discussions. But more significantly, they have no presence on these sites, meaning they can't quell threats or take advantage of opportunities these sites regularly provide. This chart figureheads an underlying theme. The magnitude of B2B discussion online is unprecedented, presenting extraordinary opportunities to affect the way entire industries function. However, only a select few B2B brands are really striving to leverage this opportunity.
But those few leading B2B brands are using the main image-based social network Instagram to communicate with their audiences in new ways. So here we've got some examples. So General Electric, they like to highlight their company history in their Instagram posts. This teaches their audience about their journey, adds context, and helps drive an emotional connection, all of which leads to increased engagement. Then we have Sprout Social, who are a social media management tool in the business software industry. They use Instagram to provide demos and tutorials. So when they release a new feature, they'll post a short 10 to 15 second run through, which helps current users adapt easily and also shows potential customers the value their tool can provide. And MailChimp use the platform to announce company news, which is a far more interesting and easily digestible method than a lengthy press release. These days, a PR campaign needs press releases, blog posts, tweets, Facebook updates, and visuals. Most B2B brands haven't updated their PR strategy to reflect this, but MailChimp have with their Instagram updates. Now, Dave, I know when we were talking about this before, you had some great examples of other B2B brands doing this successfully. So I wondered if you could just talk us through a few of them.
Sure. Hey, Natalie. Happy to do that. I think IBM, you had very high up on your list of brands that are B2B and that are engaging socially. They have a wonderful a Tumblr feed, actually. It's the IBM Blur, which is aimed at infographic geeks. So it's their Smarter Planet initiative, but it's just spelled out in pictures. They're not only good on Instagram, but they're great on Tumblr. There's a real estate firm that is in New York, CBRE, CB Richard Ellis. They're actually global, and they do a wonderful job, talking about sustainability, which is what kind of 3BL Media does. We help brands tell their story about what they're doing in sustainability and in corporate social responsibility. But they also, kind of humanize the brand because they're really about buildings, but the people in the buildings and the things they're doing for the world, I think, are illustrated nicely. There's a Dutch company that, not Dutch, but Danish, the shipping company Maersk Lines, and they have an Instagram feed that I think is just incredibly good. They have, there's a Lego, which is Danish as well. They have a little Lego man that wears a hard hat, and he's standing on a beach, and they have a close-up behind this tiny little Lego figure looking out at the ocean, and there's a big Maersk container ship, and you're able to tell what it is that Maersk Lines does through that. So, and GE, you mentioned earlier on the slide that's currently up about the history of the company, but they also talk about kind of current products that seemingly are awfully dry and that wouldn't be a consumer interest. One of the businesses GE is in is supplying railroads with the locomotives and other equipment, and they have intermodal is the form of transport that both Maersk Lines on the ocean and GE on rail are promoting, which is saving lots and lots of carbon because it's being this stuff is being shipped very environmentally friendly. And they did a video that has hundreds of thousands of views now. Last I looked, it was over 300,000 views on YouTube because they just told the story great with pictures, and then they hired a Philadelphia techno DJ to lay down this really kind of grinding musical bed for this story that they're telling. If anyone wants to look on YouTube, it's called Over 2 Million Containers. So lots of really strong social work being done by B2B brands.
That's great. I'll definitely check those out. So we've learned here that brands on Instagram can take advantage of engagement levels far greater than that of Twitter. So that's where the majority of B2B brands are at the moment. We must also take into account that the other site where B2B brands are present is Facebook. So Facebook is actively reducing organic reach for brands. It's currently at 5%. Instagram provides 100% organic reach, which is 20 times more than Facebook, so that's massive.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Instagram isn't just a good place to show off your brand, it's also proving to be a good place to actually gain engagement, click-throughs, and kind of everything that leads from after that. But one of the other kind of social platforms I didn't talk about as much is forums. There are over 1 million mentions for B2B brands recorded each year on forums. These mentions include valuable conversations about, of course, a brand's product, about customer service, and more. The sentiment of these conversations can actually be a real deal breaker for potential B2B customers. In fact, according to Nielsen, 84% of consumers take action based on the reviews and recommendations they see above all other forms of advertising. Yet B2B brands have almost no presence on forums. For every 10,000 earned mentions, there's only one owned mention from a B2B brand. So inevitably, when a disgruntled consumer jumps on a forum to complain about a B2B product, the accused brand will have no way to react. These consumers could be spreading stories of awful customer service, discrediting a product's quality, and even spreading lies about a brand. More importantly, those negative comments can turn off thousands of potential consumers. So using some very, very crude maths, I've tried to visualize the scale of this problem. So at least 3% of those forum mentions I mentioned earlier are classed as negative. So that's 31,000 negative mentions. 0.1% of these are responded to and dealt with, so that's 30,970 unresponded negative mentions. And if we assume each negative mention makes 20 impressions, so 20 unique viewers see each negative post, these negative mentions would be seen by over 600,000 people. If 84% of those consumers took action based on that negative review, we can assume that over 500,000 consumers are put off buying products each year due to forums. Yes, granted, there's a lot of guesswork I've done there, but it should start to show the scale of this problem. Brands must start monitoring their mentions on forums and other sites to make sure they're able to quickly quell negative mentions with engagement. Otherwise, they'll risk losing thousands of customers due to negative reviews. Dave, as a CMO for a B2B brand, what experience do you have with negative or positive mentions, and how have you dealt with them?
You want me to show you my scars, huh, Phil?
That's exactly what I want to see, Dave.
We actually had a bit of an unfortunate experience that affected us after I was president of a company called Critical Mention, which is a software company here in New York in the B2B space, and the product is broadcast intelligence. It's real-time monitoring of what's on TV and radio, and when Hurricane Sandy hit, we unfortunately had our data center in a building that had never had a an episode before. It was in Lower Manhattan, which got flooded, but this building had withstood a lot. Even during the blackout in New York, it had the generators that powered the New York Stock Exchange. So we felt very strong about the fact that the generators would work and that our data center was on the 3rd floor. But in fact, the fuel pump that was used to pump the fuel to the generators on the roof was in the sub-basement. So the building flooded, the basement and the sub-basement, and even the lobby had waist deep water in it. And we were down for a little bit, and we quickly scrambled and rebuilt the stack in the cloud with rack space. And but it takes some optimizing when you move from a bare metal server data center that you run to a new environment. So we had a lot of customers who were very understanding, and we told them what was going on. And had we not been monitoring forums, though, with BrandWatch, we would not have known that there were some disgruntled customers, even who had given us good lip service over the phone, saying they're with us and pulling for us through this tough time. But they were posting in forums where other corporate communications professionals, chat, that they were experiencing these problems with Critical Mention. So we reached out to them individually and empathized with them, told them we were watching, and then found manual workarounds, basically spoon-feeding them content without having to use the platform that just amazed them that we were watching, and also that we took care of their problems. But we would have been in big trouble and probably lost some business had we not been monitoring.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I love how you've matched something which is completely unrelated, like to social, but it's a problem that's offline, but you can able to see it and you're able to deal with it on social. So it shows that kind of businesses can use any social portal to kind of answer any. To our second best strategy. So Nat, handing over to you.
Yep, so the next strategy we're going to talk about is about communicating using the same social language. So for B2B marketers, understanding how target audiences communicate is really important in connecting with that group. In trying to create content that resonates, business spend considerable time and effort matching their language and tone with that of their customers. And when we were collecting social data for our recent report, we were able to analyse just how effective B2B brands were at matching their content to that of their audience. So you can see here that the owned B2B accounts actually communicate using strikingly similar methods as their audience. In fact, they use the exact same amount of hashtags and videos and only differ slightly for images, replies, and links. But that's not the case for every industry, though. The medical industry, for example, uses hashtags far more often than its audience, who use @replies more often. When we looked into this further, we saw that a large portion of the audience's @replies came from lengthy and in-depth conversations from influencers within the medical industry, conversations that brands tend to shy away from. So how can B2B brands match their social content with that of their audience? Well, one way is #Hitchhiking. So #Hitchhiking is when a Twitter account posts content using a trending hashtag to interact with the audience using that hashtag. So it's a tactic that comes with many caveats, and it should be treated with caution as it can go wrong. So there are a few rules we'd suggest your brand checks before attempting to hitchhike onto a hashtag. So I'm going to hand over to Phil, who's a community manager here, and he constantly uses this tactic.
Yeah, and it's something we've kind of coined ourselves, so apologies if you haven't heard of it before, but hopefully it will make sense. So yeah, there are 3 rules we tend to look at, and this hopefully will be familiar to any social media manager. The first rule is the hashtag something that you want your brand to be connected with? So obviously you don't want to connect your brand to a negative topic of discussion, but you also don't want to get involved in childish discussions that often do happen on Twitter. The second point is, can your brand add a valuable contribution to that conversation? An obvious point, and it sounds so simple, but for some reason a lot of brands tend to miss this point. The final one is the hashtag generating a significant amount of conversation online? If the answers to all of those questions is yes, then it may be worth trying. So as Nat said, this is a tactic we use internally in Brandwatch to provoke significant amount of brand awareness. Our sister account to the Brandwatch account is called Brandwatch Reacts, and it posts a variety of social data on topics to engage audiences we would otherwise miss. Recent example of this includes live tweeting Eurovision. So here we collected all mentions of Eurovision tweets using Brandwatch Analytics. We broke down which country tweeted the most, and those in Europe probably won't be surprised to see it is the UK. And we posted this image on Twitter, and we received over 400 retweets and generated thousands of impressions. We also use the same tactic during the UK general election debates. Live tweeting this event generated 300 retweets and over 1,000 click-throughs to our live dashboard. This tactic allows us to engage with an audience that we wouldn't usually engage with through our traditional content. Moreover, it generates a huge amount of engagement and clicks and impressions at no cost. We actually worked out for the general election debate posting that the cost of promoting these tweets with ads would be around £4,000, but with this smart social tactic, it didn't cost us a single thing.
Nice. So next we're going to talk about the best time to post. So most B2B brands should have a content calendar for each of their social media accounts. So these would schedule posts throughout the week. And while many B2B brands successfully generate audience activity with this content, many do not effectively optimize on the highly engaged days of the week.
Yeah, so the 200 leading B2B brands we analysed averaged 4.9 tweets per day throughout the work week. However, the volume of these posts published by brands sharply dropped to 1.8 tweets on the weekend. Regardless, their audience were actually more engaged on the weekend with twice as many retweets and mentions per post. This shows that businesses are, well, clearly mismanaging their content calendar by publishing too little on the weekends when their audiences are highly engaged. And the need to optimize publishing doesn't stop with day of the week. Brands must also optimize for time of the day. So this table looks at leading retailers in the US and UK. It demonstrates how leading social brands still don't optimize their content calendar to generate the highest volume of engagement. Brands tend to post the majority of their content during typical work hours from 9 to 5, but their audience don't engage with brands on that schedule. Typically, a social audience will tend to interact during their lunch break or mid-afternoon or even after work. Despite this, brands post the majority of their content around 10 a.m., or these brands did anyway, but they considerably, and this is across the board, including B2B brands, they considerably reduce the amount of content they post after the workday, so around 8 p.m., just when their audiences are coming back online. And we can see it here with a line graph. The same can be said for airlines who tweet during work hours from 9 to 5, but stop posting at 7 p.m. just as their audience comes online. For a simple solution that doesn't involve crawling through thousands and thousands of posts like we did for this, I'd encourage brands to invest in a social media management tool. The best include platforms like Percolate or Spreadfast that automatically analyze all of your posts to work out when the content you're posting performs best.
Thanks, Phil. So next we're going to talk about capitalizing on specific conversations. So the value of social extends well beyond generating buzz or promoting your brand. The best social brands will use social media listening tools to uncover specific conversations that, when acted upon, can generate tangible returns.
Yeah, so the first one we're going to focus on is intent to purchase conversations. Now, these are discussions that indicate a desire to purchase a product. So, for example, a tweet expressing an eagerness to implement a SaaS platform into a business is an intent to purchase mention, or a string of forum comments from construction experts discussing whether or not to purchase heavy machinery. Both of those are counted in this graph. So these mentions are extremely valuable to companies because they directly connect social to dollars. Sales teams can connect with these conversations and try and pull prospects down a funnel, and they can be used to help. They can even be used to help predict future sales. So we actually did some research for a video game manufacturer who wanted to estimate how many sales their games would generate upon release. We tracked both games, looking for general mentions of the game and intent to purchase mentions. The first game received thousands upon thousands of posts, far more than the other game, but it received far less intent to purchase mentions. The second game received only a couple of thousand posts, but more of those posts expressed an intent to buy. So lo and behold, when both games were released, the one with thousands and thousands of mentions actually received less sales than the one with a small amount of conversation. Now that was really surprising because, well, really surprising if you didn't see this data, because the one with more mentions had more PR, it had more traction, it had more conversation, people were talking about it more, and the game manufacturer thought it would get more sales. The one with actually got more sales was the one with less mentions, but more people saying, I actually really want to buy this game. I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm expressing a desire to buy it. So moving away from the video game industry, our data revealed that the 200 B2B brands we analysed received 72,000 intent to purchase mentions each year. This means, on average, that brands receive a new sale opportunity each day. Significantly, though, 23% of these mentions come from executives at other companies, a role that would or should classify them as an accepted sales opportunity.
So how can a business take advantage? Well, sales development reps first need to be made aware of these mentions, so access to an efficient social listening platform is vital. After that, we'd suggest each rep follows up with the post at least twice, maybe one offering contact details to talk further and another offering relevant content if they go cold. And this sort of outreach is self-promoting too, so your sales reps' communications will be seen by other Twitter followers, many of whom may also be looking to purchase and contribute to the conversation. If you stick headcount behind this, have someone potentially in marketing oversee the team, making sure none of these leads are missed, and you could be taking advantage of the 72,000 intent to purchase mentions posted each year. And so, Dave, as a CMO, how would you organise a team to take advantage of this opportunity?
Well, I think you've said it, Natalie, in that you want to have marketing involved to make sure nothing slips between the cracks, and also that it's documented so that people are that may be engaging in social about you or about a competitor are put in the funnel, in the proper place. But also the sales team certainly needs to receive training and understand what's right to engage, when not to engage publicly, but maybe to engage offline. But we see this. I saw this at Critical Mention, and in my past life at PR Newswire, and certainly here at 3BL Media, that people will openly talk about bad experiences as well as really good. The middle ground, kind of like the mediocre day-to-day, doesn't get as much coverage. But when they're complaining about a competitor, you certainly want to take notice. You may not want to jump on the competitor's grave online, but when they're saying good stuff about you, certainly acknowledge it and get it. Publicly deal with it. But this is the stuff the CFO really watches. If you're able to justify your purchase of marketing automation tools like social listening and your CRM through these interactions, that you wouldn't have known about this customer angry with competitor Y or Z unless you had this tool, and then you did the following steps and then converted them into your latest account. That probably pays for your subscription for the year. So we keep track of that really well and report on it at budget time.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dave. And actually, reiterating on something you said earlier off air, was that you don't even have to invest in a whole new team, or you don't have to invest in a whole new headcount. These tools can just be given to your existing team to make them better at the job they're doing, basically.
Yeah, they become more efficient for sure.
Yeah, and the same can be said for support teams, for customer service teams. So, keeping customers happy is traditionally imperative to decreasing churn and increasing customer lifetime value. However, with customers more connected than ever, keeping them happy can directly affect your pipeline of new leads. So a study that we looked at found that one single negative online review that receives no response can cost a business on average a loss of 30 customers. A number of companies in the B2C industry have adapted their social strategy towards enabling customer success through 24/7 social customer service. With dedicated social teams that are enabled with the CRM tools that Dave spoke about, they were able to respond diligently to negative comments and stop unhappy customers from influencing potential customers. We found, however, that B2B brands neglected this type of engagement with negative customers on social. In fact, during the 2 months we tracked them, these companies collected over 140,000 negative mentions. Less than 1% of those, that's 1% of those, were directly responded to by B2B brands. These results indicate that leading B2B brands are missing opportunities to engage with unhappy customers. Some may claim that's due to the majority of those customers being embedded in businesses and not on social. But with 3,000 negative mentions directed at brands each year, this excuse is clearly outdated.
But there are a number of business software B2B brands who are utilising social for customer service, many of which who have created specific support channels. There's some examples on screen now. So Salesforce support actively seek out negative mentions of their brand. So this tweet we've pulled out was in response to a tweet that didn't even tag them. VMware Cares, the support Twitter account for VMware, has over 38,000 followers. That really shows that their customers clearly value this method of support. They respond swiftly to tweets that tag their official handle, and then they pass them on to the support team. And here we have Intel support. So in this interaction, they were able to completely deal with the problem on socials. There was no need to pass the complaint onto a call center. Simply by linking to the correct web page, Intel dealt with the issue online, saving them time and money. So these accounts provide 24/7 social media support to customers with problems or complaints. And the quick responses contain handy pieces of advice or contact details to put the customer with someone who can help. It's fast, it's easy, and it's genuinely helpful, but more importantly, it's what customers now expect. They want to be able to tweet their problem and have it answered. And those B2B brands failing to acknowledge this will soon fall behind.
Yeah, and one of the reasons they will fall behind is due to the cost savings that a social support strategy can provide. So BT, British Telecom, calculated that the annual net cost saving of delivering customer service through social was £2 million. This is because social support employees are cheaper to train, they require less time to ramp up, and they can deal with more customers at a time. All in all, it makes customer service better for both brands and also for customers. Dave, I know that you had a point about customer service complaints and how they can be used to guide product strategy. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, we would commonly see people that either we didn't know were using our software, or maybe they were using a competitor's software, but they had very strong opinions on functionality, on broken features, and almost demonstrating their brilliance, in quotes, on LinkedIn or Facebook or on Twitter. And we would reach out to these people and invite them into focus groups and sort of stroke their ego, saying that you clearly understand the challenges of video editing in the cloud, or whatever the topic would be, or and then invite them in just to elaborate on what they had tweeted about in 140 characters, and give them a half hour and assemble the software team or a couple of people on the product dev team around a monitor. Let them even take control and share the screen with them and demonstrate what the problems are. And on more than one occasion, the CEO would leave the room kind of red-faced, thinking that this feature that he or she thought was the next major super product, in fact was a flop, and the advice from the user was, fix this key, basic form of functionality first before you go and introduce this new feature that the market's not asking for yet. So, I think use this to create some focus groups, and the product team will get some reality quick.
Yeah, it's a really great point, because it's not just saving money, kind of reducing the cost of your support team. It's saving you money because you're not building a product that's a dud, basically, and it's a product that nobody's going to buy. So saving you money on two fronts, really. Cool. So, Nat, would you like to round up the conclusion?
Yeah, so at the start of this webinar, we presented you with 3 points showing why it's pivotal that brands start using social. So we argued that the sheer volume of conversations was a worthy reason to invest. But digging into those millions of mentions and categorizing each and every one reveals 3 more compelling reasons.
Yeah, so there are 3,000 negative mentions for leading B2B brands on social media each year, but on average, just 1% of these are responded to. There are 500,000 potential customers lost on forums each year, yet brands have almost no presence on these sites. And each company receives 1 new lead per day on social, but these leads are rarely engaged with. So these 3 points put aside the general reasons to invest in social and focus on the business reasons. And as we said earlier, investing doesn't mean hiring a new team. It means equipping existing teams, support teams, sales teams, marketing teams with the platforms and tools they need to take advantage of these opportunities that they're not doing at the moment. So simply put, social media can provide additional customers to your business, but they can also make your existing customers happier.
Also, I think that businesses should understand that this adoption is an opportunity rather than a deterrent, the late adoption rather. So as we've noted throughout this webinar, social strategies that follow these best practices could prove to be highly beneficial to not just the marketing team, but also sales, support, and even product.
Yeah, so currently many B2B industries face a pivotal moment where the value of social is increasingly recognized, but the infrastructure has not yet been adopted. For many businesses, this period will be vital in shaping their future success in social. So brilliant. We would now like to answer any questions you guys may have. We see that there have already been some questions posted, so we'll answer them now. But if you have anything else you'd like to ask, please do tweet us or ask one in the session chat. Awesome. So a lot of the questions we've seen coming in right at the start from some of the first slides were about why LinkedIn wasn't included in the graph. It's definitely not because no LinkedIn conversation was there. There definitely is a lot of B2B brands on LinkedIn. I should have mentioned earlier why they weren't there. It's because the tool we use, Brandwatch Analytics, like with any listening tool, can't get access to the LinkedIn API. So unfortunately, there's no way of measuring that. We did a little bit of analysis kind of manually and anecdotally, and we reckon that slide which showed Twitter, Facebook, we reckon LinkedIn's about the size of Facebook, so it's about 10% of the market, both for earned and for owned. So I hope that clarifies that. We've got another question here, which is, does the data about Twitter, 73% of B2B top sites, is that worldwide, or is it from some country? So is it from the rest of the world, or is it from a specific country? That is worldwide, so that's the total. That's all of the world's tweets coming in there. The one caveat on that is it's only English tweets, so it's only tweets which contain English language. So if you're an Italian brand, if you're a French brand that predominantly tweets in those languages, we won't be pulling in those mentions.
We also had another question, which was about Eurovision. So Dennis asked that other countries had their own language version hashtags for Eurovision, and have you considered that? And
yeah, that was in response to that hashtag hijacking. And yes, we did consider it. Beforehand, we looked up the Eurovision's own handles, and we put together a list of the ones that each country had. So each country had their own flag that they would tweet during it, and we collected all of those and we had them. The problem was once the show started, a lot of countries came up with their own hashtags after we had set up the data that we didn't end up tracking. So we're about 90% certain those figures are correct, but obviously there are some caveats involved in that, and it might.
Hey Phil, it's Dave. I just want on the hashtag jacking front. One thing that I've noticed is that there are some journalists and some very high-profile bloggers who, after a major crisis or a natural disaster, will actually just set up shop looking for brands that step in to this hashjacking world without necessarily thinking. And what the brand community manager may be doing is they think is in reasonably good taste, but there's an ultra high alert that you should put yourself on and after a situation like that, and bring in people on your team. I'm not saying necessarily legal, but certainly your colleagues, to talk through when is the appropriate time to hashjack when there's a lot of people suffering. And if you have a corporate social responsibility campaign and you're making a massive contribution that's meaningful, that's the time, but not otherwise.
Completely, and it's why we tend to try to follow 3 rules. We don't just do that though. We've also created a sister account to kind of significantly say this isn't a main account for the brand; it's a sub brand. But yeah, I mean, the amount of examples that have fallen under the same trap that you've mentioned, KLM really springs to mind. Something they tweeted about during the World Cup was received very negatively, and more recently, it was definitely present in the UK, but Protein World and their social account were tweeting some pretty nasty responses to people who had a couple of problems with their hashtag. So
I'd say Justin Bieber's fair game, but I wouldn't mess with it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's the rule we go by.
Good.
Dave, I had a question here. I was wondering if you'd be able to answer it for Lewis. So he's asking, how would you measure true success for a social media campaign? So I was wondering if you had any insight on that for Lewis.
Well, you know, there is a colleague of mine, Suzanne Medor, who does that all the time, and I'd love to follow up offline with Lewis and provide maybe a sample report of what we provide clients at 3BL Media. You know, certainly it's the usual suspects. It's counts and amounts and the potential exposure and that.